The Captain Marvel movie had a lot working against it, namely because it was sandwiched between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, the highest-grossing superhero movie of all time and the most anticipated one. But despite being a standalone movie, Captain Marvel did have a ton of information about the MCU as a whole. We'll talk about the impact this movie had on the MCU, so now is the time to turn back if you don't want any spoilers. Everyone knows that the infamous Kree-Skrull War is based on events that take place on the pages of Marvel Comics. Even if you strictly stick to the movies, you probably get the gist of the war is that Kree good, Skrulls bad. The Kree are a blue-skinned humanoid race who rock some advanced technology, and the Skrulls are creepy green guys who can shapeshift. But in Captain Marvel, even comic book fans were shocked when we found out that the Skrulls aren't actually the bad guys. They're just refugees whose home planet was destroyed and are trying to find somewhere new to live. Somewhere the Kree won't show up and annihilate them, that is. Ever since Captain Marvel was first announced, fans have been excited about seeing the insidious Skrulls. Suddenly, all of the trust we built up with our favorite characters was completely gone, because we wanted to know who was secretly a Skrull trying to take over the world. But not only are Skrulls just trying to live their lives, when they were offered this opportunity to live on Earth, they politely said, no thanks. Now we know the Skrulls are out there in the MCU, but we also know they come in peace. In case you haven't noticed by now, the Kree aren't really the good guys, but in our defense, we haven't seen a ton of them in the MCU so far. During Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, they were threatened by Ego and the Guardians had to come to their rescue. Sure, we did see Ronan the Accuser try to take down the Nova Corps, but we also knew he and his cohorts were a rogue group of Kree. It hardly seemed fair to judge all the Krees on the action of some Xandar-hating zealots. We know that the Kree have, or at least had, some form of slavery, since Yondu stated his parents had sold him to the Kree as a child. But most people still thought of the Kree as a mostly benevolent race because, come on, Captain Marvel lived in Hala! But during the Captain Marvel movie, we learned in no uncertain terms that the Kree are definitely the bad guys. Or at least they're bad on the fundamental government level. We're looking at Yu's supreme intelligence. It turns out the Kree are much worse than we thought and could be a threat to any spacefaring heroes in the future. We learned a lot of interesting personal tidbits about Nicholas Joseph Fury over the course of Captain Marvel, the first of which is he hates being called anything other than Fury, and the most random of which is he can't eat toast that's cut diagonally. We don't think that one will have a huge impact on the MCU as a whole, but we suppose you never know. We hate to underestimate the importance of toast preferences, but we did get to learn the answer to one looming Fury-related question during Captain Marvel. How the heck did Nick Fury lose an eye? In Captain America the Winter Soldier, Fury said he lost his eye the last time he trusted someone. This made some fans wonder if a secret Skrull or even Carol Danvers herself was the reason for his missing eye. During Captain Marvel, we saw Fury bond with Goose, who looks like a cat but is actually an alien known as a Flurkin. Near the end of the movie, we see Goose take a swipe at Fury's eye, and that's how he ends up losing it. Although Fury makes up a slightly cooler cover story, the real lesson here is never trust a cat. During the movie The Avengers, Tony Stark became painfully aware of the threat of aliens falling out of the sky and attacking Earth, but Nick Fury has been worrying about the exact same scenario for much longer. He was the one who came up with the Avengers Initiative, which involved getting the greatest heroes on Earth together in case of emergencies. Since the Avengers have managed to save the world a couple of times at least, it was clearly a good idea, but many wondered how Fury got the idea in the first place. What happened that was so terrible it scared Fury so much, and why didn't it seem to have any impact on anyone else? But we learned that it was the events of Captain Marvel which traumatized Fury. He realized there are aliens out there in the MCU, and not all of them are friendly. Since Captain Marvel was jetting off to parts unknown, Fury realized he needed to assemble his own team of superheroes. While putting together what we now know as the Avengers Initiative, he looked at an old photo of Carol Danvers as inspiration. He realized her call sign had been Avenger, which caused him to term his plan the Avengers Initiative. We had been expecting Captain Marvel to be the exciting new female character in the MCU, but little did we know we would also get a gender swap. In the original Marvel comic books, Mar-Vell is a member of the Kree who mentors Carol Danvers, but in the movie Captain Marvel, we learned that Mar-Vell was a female Kree scientist working undercover. This was an interesting change, but the implication of Mar-Vell in the MCU is even more interesting. Not only did Mar-Vell become Dr. Wendy Lawson, but she was able to infiltrate major human agencies. Project Project Pegasus was a joint venture between NASA and the United States Army. Both of these organizations don't hire just anyone, and somehow Mar-Vell was able to fake her way into their good graces. Not only that, but she got her hands on the Tesseract, an immensely powerful object. Now we know that Mar-Vell had good intentions, but the idea that she was so easily able to infiltrate the program is a little disturbing. It makes us all wonder what other aliens may be hiding in important places elsewhere in the MCU. They could be anywhere, and they might not be as well-meaning as Mar-Vell. Were you surprised to see one of the Infinity Stones appear in Captain Marvel? Those things do seem to pop up whenever something catastrophically bad is going down in the MCU. The histories of these magical sentient stones can be confusing, especially since they've gone by many names over the years, but still, many fans were surprised to see the connection between Captain Marvel and the Space Stone and how it affects the MCU timeline. Mar-Vell used the Space Stone to create a light speed engine which would help the Skrulls travel to a new home. Later, when she attempted to destroy the engine, its Space Stone acquired powers bonded with Carol Danvers. Yes, it turns out Captain Marvel has one of the Infinity Stones to thank for her incredible superpowers. And we imagine this will end up being significant again in Avengers Endgame. It would be interesting to see if the fate of the Space Stone will tie into the powers of Captain Marvel and if there's any price to be paid for the powers she gained because of its influence. Although Captain Marvel will be showing up to help, her connection to the Space Stone may end up complicating matters. As much as we loved Captain Marvel as a standalone movie, we obviously couldn't help but look closely for any insight about Infinity War or Endgame. There have been many theories about when exactly Endgame will take place in relation to the overall MCU timeline. Fans saw an alleged casting call for an older Cassie Lang, and actress Gwyneth Paltrow made a comment about Pepper Potts and Tony Stark having a child. Many fans wondered if we'd be seeing a big time jump between the end of Infinity War and the beginning of Endgame. However, based on what we've seen during Captain Marvel, it seems like this won't be the case. That dreary, decimated world we saw in the Endgame Super Bowl trailer must have come into existence shortly after the decimation. We all saw Nick Fury trying to page Captain Marvel when the decimation was going down, but we didn't see her show up until the mid-credits scene of Captain Marvel. Based on her abrupt arrival while our heroes were going over the number of lives lost in the decimation, it seems like Endgame takes place right after Infinity War without a hefty time skip in the middle. When it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there are lots of amazing characters and creatures, and they aren't limited to living on Earth. Guardians of the Galaxy first took us into the wide, wonderful world of outer space, and it was clear that there are plenty of helpful characters out there. But we've also learned that there are tons of creatures out there whose motives are less than benevolent. Compared to other civilizations, C-53, or Earth as we call it, looks dull in comparison. We aren't very technologically advanced compared to the other planets, and apparently our location is less than convenient. But based on what we saw in Captain Marvel, it could be less of Earth being a bad place to set up shop, and more than that it was just kind of flying under the radar. Because once it was brought to the attention of the Kree, they suddenly seemed pretty interested in conquering it. Many fans have been expecting the Skrulls to be the next big bad intergalactic villain, but it turns out Earth may soon find a powerful enemy in the form of the Kree. Not only are the Kree a greater threat than we thought, but they might be a threat to us directly. Pretty much as soon as we were introduced to the wide, wonderful world of Marvel superheroes on the big screen, we also met S.H.I.E.L.D. In some ways, S.H.I.E.L.D. certainly likes to make with the rules and put a damper on things, but in other ways, they do have access to tons of information, useful gadgets, and they've been dedicated to protecting the Earth since before the Avengers were a thing. Oh, and they're the reason the Avengers are a thing. So we have a few things to thank them for, to say the least. We know S.H.I.E.L.D. was founded by Howard Stark and Peggy Carter way back when, but at first it was used to combat human threats. But we had no idea how long S.H.I.E.L.D. had been ready and preparing for the alien threats until we saw Captain Marvel. Nick Fury admitted he had never believed in aliens until he started getting attacked by them. While aliens have been around for a long time, it seems even S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Fury was unaware of them before Captain Marvel and the Skrulls came to Earth. Captain Marvel taught us about Carol Danvers' connection to the Space Stone and how it's partially responsible for her amazing superpowers. The movie also shed some additional light on the interesting history of the Space Stone and what it's been doing during its time in the MCU. After spending some time in Odin's vault, the Tesseract ended up on Earth where Johann Schmidt found it in 1942. It ended up plunging into the ocean along with Captain America, but unlike Captain America, the Space Stone was recovered by Howard Stark. He studied it for quite some time before eventually turning it over to S.H.I.E.L.D., where it was later targeted by Loki during the Avengers. But But it turns out that it was actually missing in action for quite some time. It was turned over to the Project Pegasus, where Dr. Wendy Lawson, better known as Mar-Vell, used it for research. When she passed away, the Tesseract ended up gathering dust in her laboratory until Captain Mar-Vell showed up. Because of this, and Goose taking it upon himself to swallow it, the Tesseract was back in S.H.I.E.L.D. custody. Ever since Marvel comic book legend Stan Lee passed away, we've been thinking about the sad day when we see a Marvel movie without one of his memorable cameos. Thankfully, he had filmed a couple prior to his passing, and one of those was for Captain Marvel. Not only does Stan Lee get his own cameo, but he even had his own fan theory, which was later confirmed by Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige. Fans had suspected that Lee was playing the same character in all his movies, an idea which Feige loved and decided to roll with. Another part of the theory was that Stan Lee was a member of an alien race known as the Watchers, who watch over important historical events. While chasing a Skrull through a bus, Captain Marvel happens upon Stan Lee, who's reading a script of Mallrats, another movie in which he had a cameo. But interestingly enough, Captain Marvel gives Stan Lee a knowing smile, and the two seem to acknowledge one another in a meaningful way. Could Captain Marvel's outer space experience have caused her to recognize a Watcher when she sees one? One thing we're always aware of when it comes to superhero movies is the danger of the power creep. Of course, we love seeing bigger and more powerful villains, and then we need to see bigger and more powerful heroes to fight them. But sometimes things can get just too complicated and overpowered, which hurts things from a storytelling perspective. Recently, things like the mystic arts and time travel have been introduced into the MCU, which threaten to offer too much power and too many complications. In Captain Marvel, it seemed as though the Skrulls may become simply too powerful. Not only can they look like anyone, but they can replicate them down to their DNA. Just because the Skrulls are mostly good doesn't mean there will never be an evil Skrull in the MCU. But during Captain Marvel, we learn the Skrulls still have a major weakness. Well, besides their distaste for flurkins, they can only access recent memories of those they impersonate. This means a Skrull masquerading as a human will be easier to identify than many imagined. But in the comic books, Skrulls are known for the long con and can remain undercover for years. It'll be interesting to see if any Skrulls are willing to dedicate themselves to this level of espionage in the MCU. There are a lot of unanswered questions in the MCU right now, and honestly, there probably will be. It's one of the many things that keeps us returning to the theaters year after year, but one major conundrum which has been on everyone's minds has been, where is Captain Marvel? After all, if she's the strongest hero in the MCU and is capable of punching spaceships into smithereens, why haven't we seen her before? You would think she would have at least shown up to major events like the Battle of New York. But during the movie Captain Marvel, we saw Nick Fury and Carol Danvers develop a respect for one another. They seem to understand each other pretty well by the time the movie wraps up, and Carol hands Fury a pager that he can use to call her. She specifies it's for emergencies only, and the one time we've seen him use it was during the decimation. This means the decimation is the biggest issue the MCU has ever faced, and it's the one time Fury thought calling Captain Marvel was warranted. If you hadn't already guessed, the decimation was a big deal, and here's evidence that it's the greatest danger in the MCU to date. Which superhero is the strongest is a question that can keep even the most brilliant comic book fans arguing for hours. We love few things more than a good theoretical superhero matchup. We've even seen many of our heroes going head-to-head in the MCU between Captain America Civil War and Thor Ragnarok. Not only is Captain Marvel new on the scene, but she was being hailed as the strongest hero in the MCU's lineup, and considering the strength we've seen so far, that's saying something. In the beginning of the movie, we watched Carol Danvers trying to use her powers while Jan-Rog constantly chastised her for being too emotional. This made it all the more immensely satisfying later in the movie when she started absolutely annihilating the Kree soldiers apart with her energy blasts. You know, the ones Jan-Rog told her not to use. Not only did she absolutely wreck the Kree soldiers facing her, but she pounded a spaceship apart. Yeah, that's not the kind of thing you see every day, even in the MCU. This movie confirmed that Captain Marvel is as strong as we expected her to be, and the bar for Marvel heroes just got that much higher. Excuse us while we take a moment to heap some praise on Captain Marvel herself. It is no secret that Marvel Studios has struggled to portray female characters in a believable, compelling, and significant way. Up until Thor Ragnarok, we didn't even have a true female villain in the MCU, and it took even longer for that for a female superhero to get equal billing to a male hero, which we finally got in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Some fans were starting to wonder if Marvel Studios would ever give a female hero her own movie, and if they could pull it off despite their less than impressive history. story. But then Captain Marvel came out. We finally got a female character who doesn't only exist in order to inspire the actions of a male character. Carol Danvers is a character who is strong without being cold. She doesn't need any shoehorned in romance plots, and she deals with mundane issues that most women are all too familiar with. Combined with female characters from Black Panther, including Nakia, Okoye, and Shuri, things are finally starting to look more equal in the MCU. It's taken us about a decade to get to this point, and hopefully there is no going back. Please. What impact do you think Captain Marvel will have on the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole? Are you excited to see her arriving on the scene during Avengers Endgame? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more MCU videos. Thanks for watching.